Howdy, my name is Nonat, and welcome to the long overdue deep dive into the Pathfinder 2e Witch class. This is something that really should have come out months ago, but life got in the way and it had to be delayed, but hey, we're here now, we're ready to go. I don't have any funny quips or interesting updates to give at this time, so let's go ahead and jump right into the Witch Guide. Starting off, we're going to see some incredible similarities to the Wizard from the core rulebook, and that's not going to stop here at the Proficiencies. It's an intelligence-based class with 6 hit points plus their Constitution modifier per level. They are trained in Perception, Fortitude, and Reflex saves, and Expert in Will saves. The only skills they gain is a skill determined by their Patron, which is the Witch subclass, as well as 3 plus their Intelligence modifier in additional skills. Though, since Intelligence is your key ability score, you're going to be starting out with 7 or 8, maybe more, trained skill proficiencies. And just like a wizard, they are only trained in simple weapons and no armor. Starting off with their first level 1 class feature, which is when you pick your witch's patron. Unlike a wizard who has derived their magical power through study and personal growth, a witch only gains their spellcasting abilities through the benefit blessings of their patron. Blessing is sort of a strong word. That can be a blessing, or it can be a curse, or it can be a gift. The patron for a witch can be a whole slew of different thematic things that lead to your class's abilities. The one thing that connects all different witch patrons, though, is the familiar. The way the witch gains access to these powers of magic is through the familiar, which is given to them through their patron. Now, this could be to keep an eye on the witch or to assist the witch in their studies and whatnot, but the familiar is a direct connection from the witch to their patron. This familiar functions exactly like any other spellcasting class who can gain a familiar or even some ancestries, though it does gain 1 additional familiar ability every single day, and then an additional ability at levels 6, 12, and 18. On top of that, a wizard's familiar is their spellbook, where a wizard has to write all their spells down in their spellbook so they can prepare it each day. A witch speaks and learns from their familiar to prepare their spells each day. In the same way that if a wizard loses their spellbook, they cannot prepare their spells, should something happen to a witch's familiar where they don't have access to it after a long rest, the witch cannot prepare their spells. The witch begins knowing 10 unique cantrips and 5 unique first level spells, but unlike a wizard, a witch is not confined to just one spell list. Depending on their patron of choice, their spell list will differ from any of the 4, arcane, occult, primal, or divine. They learn spells in the same way as a wizard, 2 new spells of any level every single time they level up, and they can also learn spells through scrolls or other spellbooks, though specifically their familiar learns the spell. Like I said, the witch themselves does not memorize any of these spells, it is all stored inside of their familiar. Also, should something happen that causes the witch's familiar to die, such as just taking a heavy hit in combat, the familiar is lost. Now, the witch does not lose access to the spells they prepared at the start of that day. If your familiar dies, you can still cast your spell slots like normal, and you receive a new familiar at the start of the next day. This can be a lot of fun to play with flavor-wise. It can be a reincarnation, or perhaps your familiar just comes back to life on its own. It's whatever you and your GM agree on as the functionality of that, and this new familiar is the exact same as your old one. It knows the same spells, nothing changes aside from it just coming back at the next day. The rest of their spellcasting functions exactly like a wizard. Cantrips are heightened to half your level, and you can heighten spells to any spell level of which you have available. Since they're a prepared spellcaster, they can heighten any spell they know. Hexes are the witch's focus spells. As you know, every spellcaster in Pathfinder 2e, as well as some martial classes, have focus spells, which cost 1 focus point, and you begin with a pool of 1 focus point. The witch casts hexes, which are unique spells only available to the witch class. All witches begin with phase familiar and gain new hexes based on their patron and lessons in the future. All witches begin with the phase familiar focus spell, which is actually a reaction that can be used to give your familiar resistance to damage when it takes a hit. The final level 1 feature available to witches is their Hex Cantrips, which by default they have none, but they get one at first level when they pick their patron. Hex Cantrips function exactly like normal cantrips in that they do not cost focus points. They're just unique cantrips available only to witches, and they do not count against your 10 cantrip total when selecting your spell list. Now let's talk about those patron theme subclasses available to witches. They give you a theme, not a specific patron to pick from. So whichever theme you pick, you can actually work on your own creative patron. You know, if you pick something like the Curse patron, it might be a very powerful witch or hag somewhere in the world that grants you these powers, or even a god who works under granting curses. The patron theme you pick will decide your spell casting tradition, a skill with which you gain the trained proficiency, a unique hex cantrip, and a specific spell that does not count against the 5 unique first level spells you pick. First off is the Curse patron, which grants you the occult spell list and gives you trained proficiency in occultism. It teaches you Ray of Enfeeblement as a first level spell and grants you the Evil Eye hex cantrip. Evil Eye has probably the most traits I've ever seen on a spell, is a single action somatic spell with a 30-foot range where you target one creature and force it to make a will saving throw. Should the target succeed or critically succeed, nothing happens at all. But should they fail, they become Frightened 1 and Frightened 2 on a critical failure. What makes this incredible is that you can sustain this spell. So long as you sustain this spell, the target cannot reduce their frightened condition below 1. So if they critical fail, sure, they can reduce it to 1, even if you're sustaining the spell. But if they normal fail, they are frightened 1 for up to 1 full minute so long as you sustain that spell. They don't even get a follow-up will save on future rounds. It's just permanent. You can spend an action on your turns to keep this target frightened 1, which on a cantrip is absolutely insane. Though individual targets are immune for 1 minute regardless of their saving throw result. The Fate patron is also the occult spell list with the occultism skill proficiency. It grants you True Strike as a first level spell and the Nudge Fate hex cantrip. Nudge Fate is actually a buff, and you grant one target you can see within 30 feet this blessing, I'll call it, and then if they make any attack roll, skill check, or saving throw, and they are exactly +1 away from a failure or a success, so they would critically fail, and a +1 would make it a failure, or a failure into a success, you can spend Nudge Fate to give them that +1, bumping their success up that 1 level. This then ends the spell, and you cannot use this effect to turn a success into a critical success, which I'm not quite sure why, but I guess it would just be too overpowered, maybe? But yeah, the target is then immune to the effect for 1 minute, but this is cool. You know, you can put it up on each of your individual allies. You can only have one of it active at a time, but once one ally spends it, you can cast it on another, or even yourself. And it's just a kind of cool way to buff your allies only when they need it. I like it. The Fervor patron grants you the Divine Spell list, Trained in Religion, the Command spell, and Stoke the Heart as a hex cantrip. Stoke the Heart is super simple. You pick a target, and then for the next minute, as long as you keep it sustained, they get a +2 bonus to all of their damage rolls. The target becomes immune for 1 minute after the spell ends, unfortunately, so if the spell does end on your ally, you can't cast it again for 1 minute after the end of the spell. But this is okay, you know, it's not terrible. I feel like this is just worse Inspire Courage, in my opinion, but you wouldn't want to give them the exact same ability as a bard anyway, so just +2 to damage, +1 more every 2 levels you gain. It definitely falls off at the higher levels, but it's not bad. The Night Patron, once again, occult spell list with Trained in Occultism, the Sleep spell, and the Shroud of Night hex cantrip. I've gone through puberty, I swear. Shroud of Night is okay. You choose one target within 30 feet and spend an action to cloak their eyes in darkness. If the creature has dark vision, this does nothing. If they do not have dark vision, it only conceals other creatures from them. Now, in conjunction with something like a rogue in your party, this can be super powerful, but on its own, it is very, very weak, and again, if they succeed the saving throw, nothing happens at all. With just how many creatures and characters have dark vision in Pathfinder 2e, this is incredibly weak, and for the reward of just making creatures concealed, it's not that great. The Rune Patron gives you the Arcane spell list, Trained in Arcana, the Magic Weapon first level spell, and Discern Secrets as a Hex cantrip. Now this one is actually fantastic. For one action, you target any creature, and that creature can then instantly, right then and there, make a Recall Knowledge check, Sense Motive check, or a Seek action. This doesn't even use the target's reaction. On top of that, they gain a +1 to that roll. The target also keeps this +1 bonus to all 3 actions for as long as you sustain the spell. So if your ranger with insane perception needs to help find that hidden enemy, you can use an action on your turn to not only let them seek for free, but also get a +1 bonus to it and a +1 bonus for as long as it's sustained. This is fantastic, and once you're level 9, you can grant this to 2 creatures at once, letting them both make a Seek action or a Recall Knowledge check. This is so much better than it looks on surface level. If I had reviewed this spell 6 months ago when I was still kind of learning the system, I would have thought this is incredibly weak, but knowing the power of Seek and Recall Knowledge, this is incredible. The Wild Patron grants you the Primal spell list, Training in Nature. The Wild spell list gives you the Primal spell list. The Wild Patron grants you the Primal spell list, Trained in the Nature skill, and your choice of either Summon Animal or Summon Plant as a first level spell. It also gives you the Wilding Word Hex cantrip. Wilding Word is somewhat unimpressive, but can have its moments. It's sort of like a very specific and weaker sanctuary. You choose one animal, fungus, or plant within 30 feet of you, and it makes a will save. Should it critically succeed, there's no effect. Should it even succeed its will save, it takes a -2 to any attack roll or skill check to perform any kind of hostile action towards you. Whether that be to grapple you, trip you, or just attack you, it's taking a penalty so long as you keep this spell sustained. Should it fail, it has that penalty, but also becomes Sickened 1 anytime it damages you. And the critical failure is the exact same, except it's Sickened 2. Keep in mind, it doesn't get sickened just from performing the attack action. If it attacks and misses because of that penalty, it's not going to become sickened. It's only if it deals damage to you. So this is cool. I love the flavor of this spell, though I think it could be a little bit stronger, especially on the critical failure. Like, the sickened condition is nasty, and it doesn't go away on its own. But then again, a -2 penalty when it targets you, even on a normal success, is pretty strong. So it's tough. I think this spell's power ceiling is low, but because it has a positive effect for you, even if they succeed their will save, it's worth the low power. So it's up in the air. It's sort of very personal preference. And finally, the last patron we have is the Winter Patron, who grants the Primal spell list, the Nature skill once again, the Gust of Wind first level spell, and the Clinging Ice Hex cantrip. Clinging Ice I do have some issues with, as it feels like the most underpowered except for maybe Shroud of Night. You pick one creature and it gets a basic reflex save against 1d4 cold damage. Keep in mind, this doesn't even add your spellcasting modifier. Should they critically succeed, they take no damage and no effect. A normal success is half damage, which half of 1d4 is going to be about 1 damage on average. If they fail, they take the full 1d4 and take a -5 foot penalty to their movement speed for as long as you sustain the spell, and a critical fail is double damage with a 10-foot penalty, again, only as long as you sustain the spell. My main issue with this spell that makes it so weak is that the damage is not also sustained. I don't think it would be overpowered for the 1d4 damage to also happen every turn as long as it's sustained. Obviously, you wouldn't force the creature to make multiple saving throws, but I think even if it succeeds and takes half damage, the witch should still have the option to sustain the spell, and they take 1/2 of 1d4 again. And especially, if they fail, they're taking 1d4 every turn, and a 5-foot movement speed penalty. Clinging Ice is almost sort of a worse Ray of Frost, and a worse Tanglefoot kind of combined. Ray of Frost gets to add your spellcasting modifier to the damage, and Tanglefoot at least has the chance to fully immobilize. Clinging Ice has such minor damage, and the penalty for the movement speed is not that bad. So I think it either needs to have the damage also sustained every round, or make the -5-foot penalty to speed the success, -10 on a failure, and then immobilize on a critical failure. It just doesn't seem worth it over Ray of Frost or Tanglefoot otherwise, both of which are available to the primal spell list. And that's it for the first level class features, and now, like any spellcaster, let's blast through the normal class features, because they're always very simplistic. Skill feats, witch feats, general feats, skill increases, you've heard it all before. Ability boosts, ancestry feats, and then at 5th level, fortitude saves increase to expert. 7th level grants you expert spellcasting, 9th level grants you expert reflex saves, and 11th level grants you expert perception. And also expert proficiency in weapons. 13th level is expert in unarmored defense, 13th level is weapon specialization to grant a little bit more damage on weapon attacks, and 15th level is master spellcasting proficiency. It's only at 17th level that our will saves increase to master. 19th level is legendary spellcasting proficiency, and then the only unique class feature from leveling up is the 19th level Patron's Gift. And it's really not all that unique. Almost every spellcaster gets this. It's just their 10th level spell slot. Simple as that. And that's their class features. I think that was the fastest we've ever gone through a set of class features ever in these deep dives. Even the cleric had some more unique stuff here and there. So let's get to the good stuff, the feats. Now obviously I'm not going to be going over every spell available to the witch, because that would be an 8-hour long video. But what I will be going over is any hex focus spell granted by a feat, so you have an idea of what that feat actually gives you. Starting off with an amazing one and what is pretty much well thought of as the strongest first level witch feat, Cackle. Cackle is really simple. You spend a focus point, and that lets you sustain a spell for a free action. Is that super overpowered? No, but it's effectively trading a focus point for an additional action, which can make or break a lot of things. Let's say you have a spell you don't want to break the sustain on, but you also want to move, and you also want to cast an additional spell. Well, you can do that at first level with Cackle. Granted, probably second level unless you're a human with a natural ambition. With Cackle, you can spend your focus point to sustain your Hex cantrip, move to reposition, and cast your 2-action spell all in one turn. Witches are incredibly flexible thanks to this focus spell. Cauldron is amazingly flavorful, but only useful if you have downtime in your campaign. Cauldron allows your familiar to learn crafting recipes, and you get a ton of free alchemical crafting recipes as you level up. 4 first level oil or potion formulas immediately, and then at levels 4, 6, 8, and every even level going on, you get additional formulas. Overall, not amazingly useful. The big benefit is that when you craft anything you get in your cauldron, you craft 6 of those items instead of 4. So normally you spend 4 days crafting, you pay the crafting cost, and you make 4 minor healing potions. Well, if you have this feat, you craft 6 instead. I will say, for Pathfinder Society play, Cauldron is an amazing feat. For those of you who don't know, between different sessions, depending on what you completed, whether it was a simple society quest, or a full scenario, or even a chapter of a adventure path, you get more downtime. And with Cauldron, you can use that downtime way more efficiently than anyone else, because you can make 6 items at a time instead of 4. Counterspell. It's Counterspell. If you want to know how Counterspell works, watch the video in the corner. I'm not going over it here. That sounded so mean and rude. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant it would take way too long to go over. Seriously, if you don't know how Counterspell works, I released a video about it a few weeks ago that helps explain it a lot better. Did I say weeks ago? I think that was like 3 months ago. You have your classic meta magic of Reach spell, increasing the reach of a spell, and Widen spell, widening a spell. I know it's really complicated, but try to keep up. Wart Witch is really interesting. It's a very simple concept. Your familiar is replaced by a Leshy familiar. What's hilarious is that having the primal spell list is not a prerequisite. So you could have the Curse patron, but you still have a leshy familiar, and that can lead to some really funny flavor, or even something really cool, like maybe your leshy familiar is a bloodlash plant leshy, you know, it's dripping with like just the red blood of enemies, it has little sharp talon, claw, leaf things. You could do a lot of fun with this. It also gives you X-ray vision to see through plants. Why? I don't know. But, you know, bushes, leaves, foliage, it no longer obscures your vision, and you don't take any penalties to ranged attacks for shooting through plants. It's great. Alright, here comes the next big pause. Basic lesson. So witch lessons are another big way they differentiate themselves from their wizard counterparts. Lessons grant a ton of different focus spells and new normal spells to your list. The big difference is that these aren't locked behind schools or subclasses. Any witch can learn any lesson, as long as they take the basic lesson feat. So for example, you could be a rune patron witch and still take the lesson of protection. You can see there's basic lessons, greater lessons, and major lessons, and I'm going to be going over those at the end of this video. I want to finish talking about the witch feats right now, and I feel like this would interrupt the flow a ton. So at the end of this video, I'm going to be going over all of the different hex focus spells you gain from each of the different basic, greater, and major lesson feats. Cantrip expansion grants you a couple more cantrips per day. Conceal spell is a fun one, but I'm not a big fan of its implementation into Pathfinder 2nd edition. You activate the meta magic to magically silence your spell to cast it without people noticing, but you still need to succeed at a stealth check against an observer's perception DC. And if your spell has verbal components, you need to succeed at a deception check also to convince people you're not casting a spell. See, to me, this is one of those classic situations where I would allow my player to attempt this without the feat. Now, the feat obviously would make it easier, but I'm still not a fan that you are magically concealing your spell, but you're still using your physical skills to conceal it. Enhanced Familiar grants your familiar another 2 abilities every single day. If you take this kind of feat as well as a witch, your familiar will be able to take like every single ability in the game. It's amazing. Familiar's language lets you talk to anything that is like part of that familiar's family. So, you know, if you have a little rat familiar, you can talk to rats. If you have a leshy familiar, you can talk to other leshies, even if you don't share a language. And everybody's favorite feat for low-level witches, living hair. Your hair is now magically a weapon, and you can make 1d4 bludgeoning unarmed strikes with your hair, even if both of your hands are full. It's actually a really good weapon too. It's agile, finesse, disarm, trip, so you can do a lot with your hair. Eldritch Nails is very similar to the hair in that it makes your nails into powerful weapons. They become 1d6 slashing weapons, and the coolest part is that you can now etch weapon runes into your nails to buff them as if you were wearing hand wraps of mighty blows. That is so freaking cool. On top of that, and probably the best part of this feat, is some amazing action economy. If you have a non-cantrip hex focus spell that costs 2 actions to cast, you can make a free nails strike and then deliver the hex if you land the attack. Now, the hex cannot be a spell attack roll itself, but if it's something that requires a saving throw, for no additional actions, you can attack with your nails, and so long as you make contact with your nails strike, you get to cast the hex as well. Though this is interesting, and I'll need to hear from you in the comments on how you would rule this. Because you're throwing in a strike here, if the spell still has somatic components, does it trigger attacks of opportunity? You know, you just sliced into someone and you're delivering the hex through your nails, so do they still get to attack back as you cast your hex? I think the logic would be that you cast the hex into your nails and then attack, so I think I would rule that they do still get the attack of opportunity, but let me know how you think and how you would rule it. Improve Familiar. If a specific familiar like an imp requires you to have 6 unique familiar abilities, you can choose to turn into that familiar even if you only have 2 less. I honestly don't think this is that good on the witch, I'm not gonna lie, because witches naturally get so many familiar abilities, you're better off taking Enhanced Familiar. Rites of Convocation is spectacular. You get to choose one summon spell. Summon undead, summon construct, summon plant, summon animal. And even if the spell does not appear on your chosen spell tradition spell list, you can add it and it counts. So you can choose summon construct or summon undead even if you have the primal spell list, and it will count as a primal spell just for you. Also, at any point on any day, you can spend 10 minutes talking with your familiar to swap out any spell you've prepared that day for that specific summoning spell. 6th level greater lesson, we'll be going over that. Steady spellcasting, if you get attack of opportunity and critically hit when trying to cast a spell, you get a DC 15 flat check to not lose the spell. Witch's Charge is really cool and adds some nice ally synergy. During your daily preparations, you pick one creature, probably an ally, and until your next daily preparation, you know what condition they're in, if any conditions are affecting them, their distance to you, and their direction. On top of that, any touch spells now have a range of 30 feet when casting them on your charge. It'd be cool if you could do this on an enemy somehow, but it does say the target has to be a willing creature. Incredible Familiar, you get another 2 familiar abilities every single day, on top of your bonus familiar abilities from being a witch. This is nuts! Merc Sight's pretty simple. Natural rain and precipitation does not cloud your vision at all. You know, if it's a stormy night and it's heavily raining, creatures are not concealed to you. But remember, this only affects natural precipitation, not something magical. Witch's Bottle can only be taken if you have the 1st level Cauldron feat, but you can imbue one of your hexes by spending a focus point and 10 minutes into a potion, and then anybody who drinks that potion is immediately affected by your hex. A really cool thing they added as well is that if you also have the Cackle feat, you can spend the additional focus point to, I kid you not, brew cackle into the bottle so that when the hex affects them, it lasts a full extra round as though you had sustained it. It doesn't say so specifically, but I'm guessing you yourself cannot sustain the spell. You know, you can't have them drink the potion and then start sustaining it because you didn't just cast it. So you're not still linked with that spell. The spell, I believe, starts functioning as its own entity, which is why you would want to cast cackle into the bottle. Major Lesson. Level 10, you already get the Major Lesson. Quicken casting's pretty simple. You know, for a free action, you reduce the action spent to cast a spell by 1. Temporary Potions gives you a free multi-class into Alchemist, though at a very, very weak comparison. During your daily preparations, you can create any 2 oils or potions, but they must be 6 levels or more lower than your character level. So at level 10, you could make 2 level 4 potions. But it's still nice, it's still free items you can use every single day, and these are magical, whereas alchemists cannot make potions with their reagents, so it's kind of cool. Also, once you're a master spellcaster, you can make 3 per day. Witch's Communion is a direct upgrade to Witch's Charge, which means you can select a number of charges up to your Intelligence mod, which at level 10 is probably 4 or 5, which means you can basically keep an eye on your entire party at all times. Level 12's Familiar's Eyes is controversial to me, I guess, in that there's a familiar ability, master ability, known as Share Senses. However, that has a 10-minute cooldown. Familiar's Eyes, for a single action, you can pop in and out of your familiar senses at will as long or as little as you'd like. So it's a lot higher level, and it's spending a 12th level feat, but it's very, very flexible, allowing you to do a lot. Alternatively, and kinda way better, is the only other 12th level spell of feat, Hex Focus, which now when you refocus, you gain 2 focus points back instead of 1, and if you're in a campaign where you're having more than 1 combat per day, that sounds pretty dang useful. Reflect Spell at 14th level is awesome. If you successfully counterspell a spell, you may reflect it right back at its original caster where they suffer the effects of the spell. It also specifically states that if it's an area of effect spell like a fireball, it only affects the caster, not the area around the caster. Rites of Transfiguration adds the Baleful Polymorph spell at 6th level to your spell list. Similar to the Summoning feat, even if it's not on your Tradition spell list, you can still learn it and add it. And you can spend 10 minutes to replace any 6th level or higher spell with Baleful Polymorph. And if you don't know, Baleful Polymorph is sort of the classic harmless polymorph we've come to know from games like World of Warcraft, where you turn a target into a sheep for a while and they can't do anything. Effortless Concentration at 16th level is when you use some downtime to retrain out of Cackle because it's no longer useful. For a free action, every time your turn starts, you can auto-sustain one spell. Although if you really wanted to, you could now use Effortless Concentration and Cackle and still have 3 actions to spend while sustaining 2 different spells, which means you could start throwing up a ton of different buffs if you really wanted to play that way. Siphon Power is fine. It almost feels like the Wizard's Drain Bonded Item feature, just at level 16 and a feat. Once per day, as a free action, you can cast 1 spell granted by your patron without spending a spell slot. You can also cast a spell that was granted by a lesson in this way. The only limitation is that the spell needs to be 1 spell level lower than your highest level. So this is level 16, you can cast up to 8th level spells, you can cast any 7th level or lower spell that is from your patron's theme or any of your lessons. Level 18, Level 18, Hex Wellspring, you recover 3 focus points when you refocus. Split Hex is really cool and great if you're fighting a horde of weaker enemies. When you it's meta magic, so you spend an action to activate it, and then when you cast the Hex on a target, you can reduce the Hex's spell level by 2. And remember, it's automatically heightened because it's a focus spell, so you're casting at level 18 a 9th level Hex. You can split that into 2 7th level Hexes at 2 different targets, so long as they're within range. Really, really cool option to have. You know, useless against super-powered bosses, really good against tons of little guys. And we finally have the 3 20th level witch spells, starting with Hex Master. Now, Hex Master gives a reason to have Cackle again. You are now allowed to cast more than 1 Hex in a turn. Usually, you can only cast 1 Hex spell, whether it be a cantrip or a Hex focus spell, per turn, once. With this, you can cast as many as you can afford with your actions. On top of that, when you use Cackle, it automatically sustains every single Hex you currently have active. So, if over the course of 3 turns, you've sustained and cast 3 separate Hexes on the same target, well, congratulations. Going forward, you can spend a focus point to Cackle, and all 3 of those Hexes are sustained, and you have 3 more actions to play with. I don't think you would ever take this alongside Effortless Concentration, but there's still some synergy to be had. You know, if you have your Hexes up, you can Cackle for those and use Effortless Concentration on a spell slot spell that you need to sustain. There's a lot of flexibility here, and that's what really differentiates witches from wizards, is their focus on sustained effects. Where a wizard might be a little more likely to throw out a fireball to blow everything up in 1 turn, a witch gets their effects out there and they stay out there. Patron's Truth is a 2nd 10th level spell slot. Witch's Hut it's a magic item in the form of a feat, and it's super creative. Though if you ask me, a little bit weak. You spend 1 full day performing a ritual which summons a hut. It uses your AC, your saving throw, it has 150 hit points, and obviously if it hits 0, it's destroyed. It also still functions like an object, so once it's reduced to half health, it is damaged, greatly reducing its effectiveness. While it can't attack or perform any skills, you can spend an action to give it an action. It will then follow that command until you give it a new one. The first one, and probably the most default, is to guard. The hut keeps an eye out and will alert you if anything walks within 120 feet of the hut. It can lock, which it locks itself with a lock spell, which I can only assume is at 9th level, maybe 10th level, because it doesn't say. You can order it to move, where it grows massive legs and has a move speed of 60 feet. However, it is slow and clumsy to the point where you cannot command it to move in the middle of combat. It can also hide, which makes it appear as a normal, mundane object of its type. I'm not exactly sure what this means. It says it functions like a 10th level illusion effect, which means it's almost impossible to see through. However, does this change its size? If you cause your hut to hide, what does it turn into? A rock? Or can it turn into, like, a small bag that you can just carry with you? My biggest issue with this is that it doesn't give any kind of way to shrink the hut or keep it moving with you. For overland travel, this is fantastic. It keeps up with the party, it doesn't slow anything down, and you always have a place to live. However, if you're going through a dungeon or anything like that, you can't just spawn the hut in the middle of a cleared room for safer sleeping. It's only useful outdoors, and I think that's what limits it and makes it not worth a 20th level feat. It's a really cool idea, really cute, really unique, and dripping with flavor. I just wish that one of the commands was almost like the pet cache spell, where it just kind of vanishes and you can call it back whenever you need to. You know, you already spent a full 24-hour day performing the ritual. I feel like it should be able to do a little bit more. But alright, we're pushing an hour of recording time, so let's get through these basic lessons, talk about them, give my opinions, and we will wrap this all up. Starting off with the basic lessons, which you can take right at 2nd level, gives you 5 choices, starting with the lesson of Dreams, which teaches you the sleep spell for your spell list, and you get the Veil of Dreams Hex. Keep in mind, none of these are Hex cantrips. These are all focus point spells. Veil of Dreams, not gonna lie, a little underwhelming to start with. For a single action, the target makes a will save. The upside is that even if they succeed, they still take a -1 penalty to perception, attack rolls, and future will saves. Even a -2 penalty against sleep effects, so you can combine this with the sleep spell. And then if they fail, they must succeed a DC 5 flat check to concentrate on anything. So this is similar to Wilding Word, like I talked about earlier. It's good because even a successful save inflicts a -1 to attack rolls. You know, that's not bad. But there's no big effect that's going to come out of this. You know, this spell is not going to swing a fight, and I feel like your focus point is probably better spent elsewhere. Namely on Cackle. Lesson of the Elements. Your familiar learns one of the basic low-level elemental spells, Burning Hands, Pummeling Rubble, Air Bubble, and Hydraulic Push, and you get the Elemental Betrayal Hex. Elemental Betrayal is interesting and somewhat confusing, but the long and short of it is that you pick one target, you cast the spell, and you sustain it for up to a minute. And from then on, whenever that target takes damage from a spell or effect with the element you chose, earth, water, fire, air, they take an additional 2 damage from the effect. Now, it does say spell or effect, so even non-magical sources of, say, fire deal the bonus damage, which means if you can inflict something with persistent fire damage and elemental betrayal fire, they will take 2 additional fire damage every time it ticks. This is fantastic and can be combined with some nasty spells for some awesome effects. Lesson of Life grants the Life Boost Hex and the Spirit Link spell. Life Boost is okay, and it's good because it doesn't need to be sustained. For the next 4 rounds, the target just gains fast healing equal to double your spell's level. What does that mean? Well, if you cast this at 1st level, your target restores 2 hit points every single turn for 4 rounds. Cast this at 19th level, they're restoring 20 hit points every single turn for 4 rounds. Scales pretty well. Lesson of Protection gives you Mage Armor and Blood Ward. Blood Ward is great and is going to be useful against pretty much anything you're fighting. You choose one creature, probably an ally, and then you also choose a creature type. You can choose from Aberration, Animal, Beast, Celestial, Construct, Dragon, Elemental, Fey, Fiend, Fungus, Monitor, Ooze, Plant, or Undead. Good luck finding a creature not on that list. And then the ally you chose gets a +1 bonus to saving throws and armor class against anything from that creature type for the next minute as long as it's sustained. This is a really good support ability. You know, you're fighting a dragon, you cast Blood Ward Dragon, it's really good. Once you're level 9, they get a +2 bonus to saving throws and armor class. The final basic lesson is the Lesson of Vengeance, which gives you the Phantom Pain spell and the Needle of Vengeance Hex. Needle of Vengeance is just a really fun way to get some bonus damage. You choose a target, and then you choose a secondary target. The first target will be an enemy, and the second target will be yourself or any of your allies. Whenever that enemy attempts to attack you or the named target, second target, they take 2 points of mental damage. Now, interestingly, and again, I don't have an answer here, Under Needle of Vengeance, it does say saving throw basic will, but nowhere in the spell's description does it talk about the saving throw. I'm guessing they make a saving throw every time they attack the named target, and then if they critically fail, they take double the damage, or if they succeed, they take half the damage, and if they critically succeed, they don't take any damage when they attack the named foe. Or you could play it where they roll the saving throw right when the spell is cast, and that's how it functions for all future attacks. So, totally up to you, it's not clear at all. Let's talk about the 3 greater lessons now, starting with the lesson of Mischief, teaching you Mad Monkeys, which is a hilarious spell, look it up, and the Deceiver's Cloak hex. Deceiver's Cloak is literally just casting Illusory Disguise on yourself, as if it was a 3rd level spell. And then once you're level 11, you can transform into any creature type as long as it doesn't change your size much. The Lesson of Shadow teaches you Chilling Darkness as a spell, and the Malicious Shadow Hex. Malicious Shadow is basically a fancy divine weapon. You effectively take control of a target's shadow, causing it to attack them for 1d10 plus your spellcasting modifier whenever you sustain the spell. The shadow can only attack, it doesn't count as flanking, it doesn't take up a space, it's basically just like Divine Weapon. Every turn, you get a 1d10 plus spellcasting modifier attack on the target whose shadow you're controlling. Now, if the creature moves into a place of complete darkness or complete light from all directions, their shadow vanishes and cannot attack them. It heightens by plus 1d10 every 4 levels, so it's a little bit on the weak side, but hey, it's free attacks. My biggest complaint is that it does contribute to your multiple attack penalty, so if you use Malicious Shadow and follow it up with a spell attack, your spell attack is going to be at -5. And the Lesson of Snow, which teaches Wall of Wind as a spell, and the Personal Blizzard Hex. Personal Blizzard is pretty simple. The target makes a Fortitude save when you cast it. Should they critically succeed, nothing happens. Should they normal succeed, they take 1d6 cold damage and the spell ends. But should they fail, they take 1d6 cold and 1d6 persistent cold damage. Though the next part is kind of a buff, kind of a bad. It does conceal all other targets from the original targets. You know, it's kind of like the Shroud of Night, but it also does some damage. But it also conceals them from everybody else, because they're in the middle of this blizzard. It also has a weird kind of wording. The persistent damage automatically ends when the spell ends. Well, how does this interact with the normal Pathfinder 2e persistent damage rules? Do they still get a flat check at the end of every turn to end the persistent damage? I would hope not, as that would be one of the best parts of this spell, and if you're sustaining it, how can they end the persistent damage? On a critical failure, both the initial damage and the persistent damage are doubled, which I think makes this a really cool opportunity for a crazy powerful sustained damage spell. But again, if they have a 25% chance at the end of every turn for it to just end, it makes this spell a whole lot worse. Also, the heightened text is kind of confusing. The cold damage and persistent cold damage increase by 1 every 2 levels. Do they mean 1d6 and 2d6 on a critical failure? Or is it literally by 1 in that it becomes 1d6 plus 1 cold and 1d6 plus 1 persistent? Because that would make this awful. It must mean d6. And we have 2 major lessons to round us off. Lesson of Death, which teaches you Raise Dead, and the Curse of Death Hex. Pretty simple. 2 actions, you pick a target, they make a Fortitude save. They critically succeed, nothing happens. If they normal succeed, they are afflicted by the Curse of Death's first stage, but the curse cannot proceed past the first stage. If they fail, they are afflicted by Curse of Death stage 1, and it does start to increase. And if they critically fail, they start at stage 2. Effectively, every round they're affected by this curse, they must make a Fortitude save. If they fail, the curse progresses, and if they critically fail, it progresses 2 stages, and the damage very quickly escalates. First stage is 4d6 negative damage, and fatigued, reducing their Fortitude save for the future. Stage 2 is 8d6, and Stage 3 is 12d6. If they somehow reach Stage 4, it is instant death. Keep in mind, the curse only lasts as long as you sustain it, and a maximum of 1 minute. So if they succeed 1 or 2 saving throws, the chances of them reaching that 4th stage is very low. And every 2 levels, the damage goes up by 1d6 on every single stage. So it becomes 5d6, then 9d6, then 13d6. This scales well. This is a fun one. This would be my bread and butter if I made a witch. And the final lesson we're talking about is the Lesson of Renewal, which teaches you Field of Life and Restorative Moment. Compared to Curse of Death, Restorative Moment is super boring. You cast it on a target, and the target reduces its drained and doomed condition by 1. Now don't get me wrong, reducing those conditions are nearly impossible, so that's really cool that you can get rid of them, though it's not a huge impact. It's not going to twist anything like the Curse of Death does. On top of that, any affliction that's a poison, that's a curse, that lasts 1 day or longer, the target gets an additional saving throw against. So is this good? Yeah, for 1 focus point, this is absolutely amazing. But it's not exciting. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Witch in Pathfinder 2e. Do I think they're different from the Wizard? Yes, absolutely. Their playstyle is so much more focused on their focus spells. Sure, their normal spellcasting might be similar, but it's so much more heavier focus over there, whereas the focus spells are much more of an accoutrement for the Wizard. Do I think they're fun? Yeah, I think they're cool. Do I prefer them over a Wizard? No. Wizards are my baby. I love wizards, and I will always love wizards. The Witch is cool, though. It's neat. I think my biggest disappointment with the Witch is, sadly, with the Hexes. Aside from 1 or 2 here and there, they don't seem incredibly impactful. And I know they're not supposed to be, because they're long-term effects. You know, you slow them by 5 feet for up to 1 minute. It adds up, but I still think the effects could be a little bit stronger. But let me know what you think. Do you think you're going to be playing a witch? If you do, tell me about it. Tell me the ancestry. Tell me the background. Tell me all about your character. I love reading it in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please do consider liking and subscribing. It helps the channel. We are closing in on that 10,000 sub mark, by the way. We are less than 2,000 away, which is incredible. So thank you all so much. There are links in the description to my Patreon if you would like to support me and get access to some really cool homebrew. And there are also links to the Discord and the Twitter. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And until next time, Nonat once.